Hello, this is John from Western Maine Defensive Tactics, and I'm going to introduce a new series of reviews of budget Bowie knives. And today we're going to review one that you might be familiar with. This is the Bowie knife, the classic Bowie knife from Legendary Arms. Now, this knife is actually a Windlass Steelcrafts product, and we're all familiar with those because we know that Cold Steel has a lot of their swords made there. Atlanta Cutlery has a lot of their like classic reproduction knives done there, the swords and things like that. So they're pretty well known in the cutlery community as a decent manufacturer that manufactures high carbon steel knives. Now, I'm familiar with Legendary Arms from about 20 years ago, or over 20 years ago, when I bought this knife from them. This is again a Windlass Steelcrafts product, the 1849 rifleman's knife reproduction that you've seen throughout this video, or this video series. Now, in reviewing these knives that are, let's say, less expensive, it's not my intention to say, hey, this is a $20 knife that is just as good as a cold steel knife, you know, like a Natchez, or one of the custom knives or handmade knives that you'd run into. Not at all. But I also am aware that some people just don't have the $100 or $200 or $400 or $500 to spend on a higher end Bowie knife, but they really want to get their hand into the Bowie knife game. If you don't have money for a Trailmaster, where else can you go for an entry-level Bowie knife that is not really a waste of money? Well, we're going to look at that. We're going to see if some of these less expensive knives have the durability and quality as a basic working tool that makes them useful to us as Bowie knife lovers, you know. Now, the other purpose behind this series is going to be to discover which knives that are inexpensive, even if they're not good as working tools, which ones are good enough to be considered trainers. You know, knives to throw, Bowie knives to use on the Pell, things like that. Ones that are good enough to go beat up without breaking in half, you know, in the first day of training. Things like that. So even if the knife is a stainless steel knife that is dead soft, that can't hold an edge, it might be good enough to use on the Pell. But we've got to do a few tests to make sure we verify that first so we don't get hurt in the process. But let's talk about this particular knife. This is a Legendary Arms Bowie knife, as I've said. It runs about $39.95, about $40. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed with what I get for my $40. I was not expecting a lot at all. And I haven't beat this knife up at all. I haven't even sharpened it or cut anything with it, because I wanted to show you what I got out of the box before I did anything to it, so you know, if you bought one of these, basically what to expect. The fit and finish on this knife is pretty good for a $40 knife. Let's look at the blade. Now, the blade is pretty well finished. There's no big dings or scratches or gouges in it. It's pretty well finished. The stock is not really thick. If you remember if you've watched my blade video, I talk about blade thickness, and I talk about this knife as being minimally thick enough to be a Bowie knife. And this is about 0.20195 in spots, and this is even thinner than this. This runs about 0.171 inches, which is pretty skimpy. But this knife is still has a little bit of heft to it. Weighs about 18 ounces. 18.05, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. It has a little heft to it because of the width of the blade. Now, I'm not a big fan of wide blades or saber grinds, but you know what? There's more than one way to skin a cat. And I know that this pattern, the Coleman-Western Bowie, or the Western Bowie pattern, is a much-loved pattern. Many people love the aesthetics of this knife. They love how this knife looks. They love how it feels in their hand. So this is kind of a winning design anyway. So, what's good about this knife? Good steel. It's got probably 1055 steel in it. I haven't verified that, but that's what that steel strikes me as. The heat treatment is a little bit in question, but this knife actually has quite a bit of things going for it. Like I said, this was more knife than I expected to get out of the box. If any of you are familiar with the old Pakistani Bowie knives of this design, that's kind of what I expected, but this is a lot better quality than one of those. So, moving along down the blade, we know the steel is a basic carbon steel. We know that it's a little bit thin. We know that it's got a wide blade, but it's got potential. We know that the heat treatment probably isn't 100% where we'd want it. It's probably going to be a little soft, as a lot of the Windlass products are. Let's look at the Tang Transition. Now we can see right here in the guard, if you can see that, you can see that there's a gap right here in the guard. But you can actually see how wide the Tang is. The Tang is actually fairly wide. Sure, there's about a 90-degree cut where it transitions from the Ricasso to the Tang, but the Tang retains, let's say 70 or 80% of the width of that Ricasso, so it's not a huge reduction in mass. It's not as well done as it could be, but hey, this is a $40 knife. Going back into the Tang, we see it maintains a pretty good thickness, which on a lot of more inexpensive knives, they say they're full Tang, they look like they're full Tang, but a lot of times they have a stub Tang that comes back into here and ends, and all this is a separate piece of steel. That actually is quite common for lower end knives. So again, like I said on the Tang blade, on the Tang video, you need to know what's underneath your handle. You need to know if you're going to use that knife. Now, fit of the guard, it's for a $40 knife. You get a gap here. You've got a gap here. If you look at it in this dimension, you have a slight gap here where the shoulders are visible. The guard isn't fitted 100% tight. And on the back side of the guard, you've got a little gap here and a little gap there. The handle is pretty well fit to the guard on one side. On the other, there's a bit of a gap. Not that big of a deal. The fit is a lot better than I expected to get. The handle itself, I believe, is rosewood and isn't actually that bad. It's not that uncomfortable. I figured it would be a big, chunky, bulbous thing, but it actually isn't that bad. But there's also enough material there, enough wood there, where you could fit that to your own hand. It's finished pretty well around the outside. There's, a few grinder marks here, and this is the inside of the bird's head, or the palm hook, is a little rough. That could use some cleaning up. But again, this is a $40 knife, and I wouldn't expect it to be 100% perfect. Now, a couple other things about this. We talked about this, how this is a Western pattern Bowie knife. Some of you are thinking, hey John, is this a good candidate for Bill Bagwell's modification? Narrowing the blade, recutting the clip point, cutting off the guard, or reshaping the handle? Well, I believe it is. I don't know yet. I'm not going to do it yet until I get this sharpened and take it out and do a little work with it. But in my initial testing is basically a British proof test type of thing. I take this out on a large piece of oak I have seasoned for. I use this on my own knives too, and I whack it about hard 5 times on the back and then on each side 5 times. The blade didn't bend. It didn't break, obviously, and it held up pretty well. The guard rattled a little bit, but that's not the end of the world. We know this is a $40 knife. We know we're going to go out and do some work with this. Get that back on camera. So again, a pretty decent $40 Western style knife that has potential to stand up to those Bagwell modifications. Now, what I'm going to do from this point is I'm going to take this knife and I'm going to sharpen it up. I'll probably do that with a file and stones. See if it gets sharp enough. Take it out, cut some wood with it. If it passes those tests, what I will likely do is do the Bagwell modifications on it and see how that handles as well. But again, a Windlass Steelcrafts Bowie knife, fairly well finished. It's not as rough as I expected it to be for $40. And honestly, I've wanted to review this knife for a long time. I just haven't purchased one. And my intention was to purchase 2, one to leave as is and one to automatically do the Bagwell modifications on. But finances didn't allow this time. But that's okay. I think this will be, based on my experience with this knife and some of the other Windlass products, I think this will be a pretty decent field knife. Sure, it won't have the edge holding that $100 knife is, like your K-bar heavy Bowie or whatever, some of your Camillus or Ontario offerings, Camillus being now defunct. It won't have that kind of edge holding, but it will hold up because my old Ames knife took a hell of a pounding, and I expect this will too. It didn't fall apart when I whacked it on the log. Granted, it's a little light overall, but not everybody wants a big heavy Bowie. And how does it move? Well, it back cuts pretty well. It moves pretty well. It's nice and light. The clip point isn't optimized for back cuts or any of that, but it'll still work. It'll still move. The handle needs a little improvement. Maybe we could work with a guard, but if you want to buy a Bowie knife of this type to do some modifications on, this is actually a pretty nice looking knife to do that with. I'm going to buy another one of these. It's another one of these at some point, because I want to see if the next knife I get is consistent with this. If the next knife I get is the same overall quality, if it's as nice, that sort of thing. I'd be curious about that, because this might come in handy later on down the road. Sheaths, you really want to see the sheath that came with this? We haven't talked much about sheaths, but I'm going to at some point. This is the sheath that came with this knife. It's what they used to call a swing sheath. And this is something that you can keep the knife in. And that is about it. It's made of leather, thin leather, though fairly stiff. It's not butter soft. It's got no welt in it, though it has some rudimentary, split end rivets, and one line of stitching. You're not going to carry this. Any real serious user is not going to carry this knife in this sheath for any length of time. It's just not going to survive, because if this knife is anywhere near sharp, it's going to cut its way through the stitching. This isn't a quality sheath, but I don't really think that when you're dealing with lower end knives, that you can really expect a sheath of real good quality. We will talk sheaths and carry at some point in the future, but we're going to just accept the fact now that it comes with basically a blade cover. Now, if you really needed to use this sheath, if you were in a pinch, you could cut it right across here and then come up with some sort of a stud or a loop arrangement here to keep it in your belt, and you could carry it that way, but that wouldn't be my preference for carrying a razor sharp tool. But what we have here is we've got a nice high carbon steel blade. Excuse me. We've got a nice high carbon steel blade with a decent finish on it. A nice brass guard with a decent finish on it. A pretty nice handle. And look, these are Corby bolts. These aren't just brake shoe type rivets that you hammer together. These are actual Corby bolts, which really surprised me. I didn't think I was going to get that quality of handle attachment. I'm not big on being a connoisseur of wood, but that's a decent looking piece of wood for a $40 knife. Overall, this is a pretty neat knife. I like it, and I'm looking forward to sharpening this thing up and doing some testing with it. But again, introduction to a little series on budget Bowie knives. This one survived initial testing. It's going to get sharpened up. We'll take it out, do a little chopping, and I'll let you know how that works. All right, take care. Thank you for watching.